Hi, I'm Shari Smith with Evaluation into Action and author of Nonprofit Program Evaluation Made Simple. And I'm here with
I am Dr. Shaunette Parker. I am the clinical assistant professor of psychology at Lander University.
Wonderful. And we're just going to talk a little bit today to you about how it worked teaching program evaluation in an undergraduate course. And very excited that Dr. Parker chose to use my book. So we're just going to talk a little bit about how that worked and what the response was to the book and just share that out for everybody else to hear. What do you think? Tell me a little bit about how it went.
First, I'll just from a perspective as being a professor, I think it was very easy to follow. I really appreciate just having everything lined up. So outside of being a professor of psychology, prior to getting into that full time, I've worked for nonprofit organizations. And when I first read the book, I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly the stuff that I do. This is how it all works. And it's all laid out. But as a professor, I don't have time to really figure out how to package it, or not wanting to have to search and find articles to piece together and all this information. And so it was great that this was what I felt like a real life tool. It was the book really shows what I do in action in a nonprofit setting. And so I really appreciated having everything laid out that way. Very easy to read, short chapters, plain language. Sometimes I think that when we have textbooks, they get so jargony and they're intended to be difficult to read, I don't know, just to show that it's a text or something. And so for me as a professor, it felt just very comfortable. I could really stand behind the information. So it wasn't difficult for me to share and say, okay, to my students, read this chapter. But then I also had some real world experience to connect with it and talk about what it was like for me in that space. What I did was, because I wanted the class to be fairly hands-on, this past semester and this coming semester, had to teach it in a virtual format. So I wanted to find, I know, because of where we are.
And here we are. Yeah.
Right. And Lander actually just started their human services program, because this class is offered as one of the requirements with the human services program. And that program is actually fully online. And so that's what this particular class was designed to be a part of that program. Fantastic. And what I did was I wanted them to leave with a project or a portfolio of work. And so I spent more than 10 years working for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. And so the project that I designed, they had to basically pretend that they were running one of the programs offered through the Boys and Girls Club, utilizing that as a model, because, in 6 weeks, we don't have time for them to develop a program, implement a program, get the data, and they wouldn't be doing that in real life. But I wanted to use an organization that has a lot of rich data that's already available. I have personal experience working with them. And so we use that organization as a model for us to then apply the concepts that were available through the book, and for them to speak hypothetically, if you were the program coordinator, if you were running this, and what kind of data would you need, and really just following the steps that you outlined in the book in terms of how would you apply that, how would you evaluate based on the information from the Boys and Girls Club. So to me, it fit just really nicely. And, having the students being able to develop an impact model based on what, the Boys and Girls Club is, and based on what you said in terms of how to set that up. And so it allowed me to evaluate their work in that way.
That was going to be one of my next questions, was then did they create their own impact models or a logic model? There's a chapter dedicated to that in the book. And just to clarify, I think logic models are great, but we both know sometimes when people say logic model, they like run for the hills. They just like, no, I don't want to do a logic model. So I started to see that more and more in my own practice. So I shifted to creating an impact model, which has a lot of the same elements of a logic model, like it's the same logic, pun intended. But what we did was you really look at well, what does the program do and what changes it expected to make? And then the impact model also leverages visualization to put it into the brand colors. So I'm curious, were there multiple groups then all creating impact models? So you had different impact models depending on the group, or did they collaborate on one model, or what does that look like?
It was an individual project. And
Gotcha.
and they actually had an option of 3, because then I also do what I call a results framework,
Oh,
which is
perfect.
very similar to that. So we talked about all 3 and they were able to then I do either the impact model, a logic model, or a results framework. And it was based on their individual work and the individual project that they, or organization, not really organization, I guess, program that they were assigned, because the Boys and Girls Clubs offer several different
They have a lot
programs
of programs, yeah.
yeah. And so I think it was for the students deciding which one would work best and would be easier based on the information that was available about the different programs that they had. And so we went through and they were able to identify one of the 3 that they wanted to
That's
utilize.
great. That's great, because then that sets the foundation for the alignment, right? Of like, what are you going to measure? Like, what do you expect to have change? And
Yes.
then finding data collection tools to measure that change, and then
Yes.
reporting out. So did they create any data collection tools then that
Yes.
align to their models? Yeah,
Yeah,
tell me about
that was also another part of task. And really, they really just drew heavily on the information that you had available in your companion site and the template that you provided for that to be able to create a plausible data collection tool. Some students were able to research and find other tools that had already been used.
Which is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And connecting it that way. So that's what they were supposed to do based on then the information, being able to align what type of data you would connect. And so they created these sample data collection tools that they would utilize. They discussed, also just the process of if they're doing observational collection of data, if they are doing interviews, qualitative versus quantitative, data. So they had to kind of talk about that and what they would expect to get. Because some of this was obviously kind of made up. I mean, it stemmed from what was available for the Boys and Girls Club, but then based on what they would expect to receive.
Okay. That's fantastic. So they have this alignment where they're looking at the plan and they're creating the data collection tools. Then were they able to do any data analysis? And I know it was all mock. It wasn't real, like they just kind of made it up, but just to get a sense of how it worked.
Right. We didn't go that far in terms of data analysis. What I did was they read other articles and watched other YouTube that talked about like the data analysis piece and what that would look like. But we didn't take it that far. We kind of stopped there. But they did talk. We talked about, it's hard in this space, but like, here's what it would look like. And here's what some of the analysis might look like if you were taking this a step further. But we didn't go into the analysis portion.
And that makes sense to me, because I mean, I think when you're teaching a course, for me, when I teach, because I'll be teaching program evaluation at the University of Portland in the fall, they have a nonprofit MBA program. And it's the same thing, like the crux of it, the piece that I really like to dive into is how do you create that plan? How do you decide what kind of model you're going to use and really articulate and define the impact you expect the program to have? Because so often that is missing in the real world evaluation work, right? When I go into working with an organization, that's the first thing we do together is literally get everybody onto the same page. And I'm really glad to hear you say you use the companion website. That was created for all of the things that don't fit in the book. Right? Or that you can get the full color, full page examples there. And pretty recently, I just added 3 full evaluation plans from 3 different clients that gave me permission, like, yeah, go ahead and put our full plan in there, because I really think learning happens by example. So if you're like, and then if you're given like 3 very different examples, but that use the same basic formula, I think that, students can really look at that and go, oh, this is how I apply it then to the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's great that they were able to do that.
Well, that's exciting too, then, because I'm teaching again this semester. So then I'll be taking a look at that and seeing what other tools and resources are available there.
Oh yeah, I'm always trying to update that companion website. And honestly, for you or any of your students, if they have input of what they'd like to see on that website that's missing, I'm really open to that. And anybody listening out there, if you have my book, you're like, Shari, we really want to see, and then whatever it is, I'm happy to try and make that happen, because the companion website offers an opportunity to extend beyond the book and to update content on a regular basis. So it's a way to stay connected and stay relevant with whatever the changes that are coming. One of the in the survey chapter, one of the things that came up in more recent years, I'm struggling to see how long ago, but one of the common ways in demographics, people were asked, how do you identify, like with your racial background, select all that apply. And for years, there's been other. And then research has shown, don't ask other, because that makes people feel less than, right? I still see it today in surveys, and I'm like, stop doing that. It's such an easy fix to put prefer to describe. So it's like things like that, I anticipate more changes to survey design or data collection processes or whatever it might be, and opportunities to put those on the companion website, because I don't think I'm going to do another edition of the book at this point.
Okay.
That was a big lift, but all that information will be on the companion website. So were there anything that came up with your students that they were wishing that they had more information about, or questions that they had about evaluation that surprised you, or like, I didn't, because you and I are so in it, right? We're like, we've been breathing this for a long time. It's like been taking a step back from someone from the perspective where it's new to them. I'm just curious how that landed.
I didn't get too much of that. And I suspect it's probably only more so because this was a virtual class, the way it was taught. And so in that space, they do the assignments that you set forth. They might engage a bit as far as like when I provide feedback on an assignment, and they might ask a question, but it's not the same as if we were in class and having open discussion back and forth. And I expect some of those kind of questions would have come out, but I didn't get any real questions in terms of anything they were surprised about, or when it comes to evaluation. And I really just think that's because of just the structure of the course, and it just didn't lend itself to that kind of back and forth. Doesn't mean that they didn't have those questions. It was more so the questions that I got just clarifying is the information there. But I think that might just speak to how clear your text is. And I think, honestly, I do. And that it's just pretty straightforward. And it's like, well, really, what questions would you have? And maybe we would have had more questions if we were doing the actual analysis part. But I mean, everything was just so laid out in a way that, okay, this is what it is. This is how you do it. It's pretty clear. And so I think that's why there wasn't much confusion or anything like that. But as far as being able to really dig into like what this looks like and really talking about some of the questions, getting into conversation in a real life application, being that it's a virtual course and it's asynchronous, we just didn't dig into that.
That makes sense. Well, I had a final question for you. And of course, if you want to go, any other thoughts to share for someone considering using this in their classroom, or for someone considering purchasing the book in general, any thoughts to share with your fellow teachers, professors out there who are considering adopting this in any capacity?
Well, absolutely. Well, first of all, when I first read the book, I immediately went to my board chair of the nonprofit that I work with and said, oh my goodness, we all need to find time to read this book. And this is what we need to be focusing on when it comes to evaluation and even just getting better. Because even though I've been working with nonprofit organizations for more than 15 years, sometimes I find myself getting away from the evaluative portion and forgetting. And it was a good reminder of how evaluation is intended to make you better at what you do. And it shouldn't just be this kind of ad hoc thing that you add on. And so that's number one. I recommend it to, especially your small nonprofit organizations, to do this. And you really laid it out how, yes, in a perfect world, you'd have these large databases in the system and you'd have this external organization helping you with that, but you don't have to have all of that. You don't need it. And so to me, that's where I appreciated it as someone. I mean, I work with an organization. There's really like three of us, right? Three people. So it's like, but we're responsible for this information to our funders and we want to do better at data. So that's why. To anybody else who's looking from an academic standpoint in terms of teaching and utilizing this book, I say go for it. It's really easy to read. As this is probably the first time as a professor I've read a text that I'm using from start to finish. I've never read a full textbook. I'm sure I'm not.
I don't know if I have either. Yes, I get it.
Yeah, and this is the first time, like, oh my goodness, did I just sit here and read this entire book? And I actually read it before I actually utilized it for the course. And I was like, that was a really easy, fun read. And if I think that, I mean, my students, I didn't have anyone complaining like, oh my goodness, this is so boring. This is hard to read. I don't understand. And so it's just clearly laid out in that way. I'd say if we're going to continue to use this, I did develop my own kind of like PowerPoints and using from that. I would love to see that they would be used for maybe even a test bank.
That's a
helpful.
great idea.
It
Yeah.
would be great. Maybe if there's other professors like myself who's using it and we come together and kind of work as a team to kind of share and fill in and help you, gather some text bank questions and some PowerPoints and things like that to utilize. That was the only thing that would be useful. But I was able to do a lot of that with ease.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that as I continue to utilize the book, especially this semester, I'll, make some revisions on things that I did for last semester and things like that. So I'd say, give it a try, use it. It's put together really well. There's not much need for having to go out and find other articles. I just found supporting materials, just like how you put in examples
Right.
from the organizations that you worked with. I just added even a few more of those things to,
Wonderful.
add into the examples, and particularly since I was using the Boys and Girls Clubs of America as a backdrop for that. But it's very, very user friendly.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for making time today to talk about it and to share about your experience in using it. It's really exciting because, the book is exactly a year old on Thursday, January 13th. It'll be a year old. So happy birthday to the book.
Yeah.
And Shaunette, thanks so much for making time and for reaching out and using the book. It's really exciting. And thanks to all of you for listening and tuning in, and hope to do this again with you sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.